And welcome to Delightful Dissent. It's episode 29 today, and I'm going to be talking to Chloë Aldam about pushing buttons. Chloe's a parenting coach, and I'm really excited to have her on the show. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us, Chloë.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here today.
That's great. Thank you. And it's a really interesting topic, I think, for me, because I think pretty much everyone has some buttons, whether they're obvious or not, and how readily pressed they are is slightly different. But I think
buttons are everywhere, and you have more than you know about.
Absolutely. I think, and where they come from and why they're there and what's about. I'm really looking forward to getting into that and exploring that a bit more. But in case you're new to Delightful Dissent, it's a show about the hidden barriers, these kind of implicit beliefs and hidden things that can really trip us up. The kind of things that fall between what we know and the really deep assumptions we make without really knowing that we're making them. And how we challenge those, how we play with those, and how we can come up with different ones. The intention is to, help you with specific stuff, and the specific stuff we're talking about today. But it's also to give you a sense of doing this work for yourself. I really want everyone to be able to go out there and challenge assumptions and do that as a normal part of what they do. So it's just a chance to get some ideas about how we're doing it, and then you can maybe do some for yourself. It's also about normalizing not knowing and exploring and uncertainty, not always having the answer, and what we do when we don't have the answer. And relatedly, we're not experts here. We're not looking for perfect answers. We're going to be exploring too, and sharing our own experience. It's called Delightful Dissent, though, because hopefully it's fun, it's joyful. We can enjoy doing this work, enjoy doing this stuff, when very often we'll have got in trouble for doing it in the past, which is very relevant to today's topic, I think, actually. But challenging assumptions and thinking about things differently is something we often in the past will have got in trouble for, and I'm interested in doing it in a fun way and having fun with it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the show is genuinely live. We might talk about challenging personal topics. There may be difficult stuff coming up, triggering stuff. There may also be strong language. So if either of those things are an issue for you, then please know that that's a possibility. It really is a conversation and an exploration. And if you're watching live, please do comment and join in. And we can, bring you into that conversation. We'd love to hear from you. If you're watching the recording, there will be more information about how to get in touch with Chloë and how to get in touch with me at the end of the show. So this idea, this show really came about from my working with and championing the work of people who are taking a different approach to the really big, messy stuff, the difficult stuff. And Chloë is one of those people. One of the joys of doing the show is that I get to meet people doing this kind of work who I wouldn't otherwise have met, and was introduced a few weeks ago, and was really struck by playful openness around some things that are often really heavy and often feel really, difficult. And I thought I'd really like to get to understand a bit more and learn a bit more, really. But could you, Chloë, share a little bit about, as you say, who you work with and the kind of people that you like to, the kind of work that you like to do?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I call myself a parenting coach or a parent coach, and I work with the people that are just frustrated, overwhelmed. They just don't know what to do next with their child. Their child is essentially pushing buttons, but lots of them. They're having maybe emotional breakdowns physically. They can be really, really hard work. And I come from an angle of knowing a lot of those scenarios because I have 3 children and their ages are 13, 10 and 8, and they go through so many different stages as they're growing up, and I was kind of put on this pathway by a kindergarten teacher about 10 years ago, and they said, have you read this book by Kim John Payne? It's all about simplicity parenting, and we highly advise all of our people that come through this school and kindergarten to read it. And I did so, and I just found this love of helping out other parents learn how well I did things, and also how I didn't do things, and how I turned a failure into a success. And also, how on earth did I keep my patience whilst I was doing so? And I think I have to also, in my background, have to thank my parents for that a lot. So I know so many of these kind of parenting things that can push all of these buttons. And I come from a slight side angle as well, from having science in my background. So I trained in genetics initially and worked at a research station. But then as the research station closed, I had seen this amazing form of bodywork called equine bowen. And I went, I want to do that. I want to work with horses, but found out you had to work with people. So I did so. And I'm working both with people, with bowen, which is just this very simple remedial therapy, but it goes deep. And then as I had a family, I started to work out that all of this body work, well, actually, it's something that all of these parents out there, they not only need the body work, which sometimes self-care just disappears when you have children, but there's also all of this emotional trauma that parenting is bringing in. So it's not only working with the physical body, it's also working with the emotional level, with the physical level, and also with the past historical things that have come in. So it's kind of it's the sum of who I am and who I work with, is parents, but also people who have been parented, working at a body level, but also working at a coaching level, finding out exactly where those buttons are. And oh yes, it's a joy to be able to share this with people and see those moments where they go, oh, that's why I react, and that's why I do that, and there's a different way. Show me. So yeah, that's where I come from, and yeah, it's quite a passionate thing that I love doing.
It's great, and I think it really is one of those areas that is at the intersection of so many potentially difficult things. You know, the one's own experience and society's expectations and difference and similarity, and so many. Like it feels like a real nexus of that can get really tangled up and be really really tough. So I think it's a really interesting one to explore, and yeah, I like when we came up with the idea of the topic of pushing buttons, I thought it was a great way into that, and something that has relevance for well beyond the actual act of parenting directly, and but also a lot of relevance to that. So
it's relevance to every single moment that people are around. So it's I think one of the biggest things as somebody is parented, or when they become a parent, is the change in having to live in the now. And I think when people first have a child, that's probably the biggest, most shocking thing, is having to be at beck and call every single moment, 24 hours a day. And they hadn't necessarily come across that before, or not for quite some time. And so that's kind of one of those, it's almost the first button of, what do I do now? Yeah, it's quite a big thing. And how you mentioned just then as well about how tangled things can become. And it's one of the things that I love teaching. There's this beautiful analogy of, I explored it last year because I've also got horses, but I tape a whole section of field off. And when you get a whole load of electric tape all put together, I wind it up either around my arm or round fence posts. But if a child comes along and starts untangling bits, and I've had foxes as well before now go through, they make a great big tangle of it. And it's what sometimes we're presented with, great big tangle. How do we untangle it? And for some people, just looking at a tangle presses a button. And they just want to leave. They want to check out. And in some ways, for some kind of solving of these tangling bits, we do need to check out a little bit. So we need to learn about a bit of dissociation and just go one level away to check out where we are, so that we can then go back and go, where do we start? And just that beginning bit of untangling. And then by the end of the time, yeah, I've always got all of that tape all the way, rolled back up again and stored away. But it can take time, and sometimes does. And can it be frustrating? Yes. Can I go through the frustration? Yes, because I know how.
I think it's a really interesting one, the being with something, but not completely absorbed by it, completely overwhelmed by it, feels like a lot of this on some level. But before we get too much into the assumption, I'd like to ask, I always like to ask my guests if they've got a quote that kind of gives a bit of a perspective that they like on the thing. So yeah, have you got something that you'd like to share?
I do. It's from the book Simplicity Parenting: Using the Extraordinary Power of Less to Raise Calmer, Happier, and More Secure Kids. And it's fairly near the beginning, and it's just a little side bit, which is it's by Kim John Payne. And there's a little bit saying the process, getting started. In terms of areas to change, I usually see two categories: what is important and what is doable. What seems the most important is usually not. What is most doable is the place to begin. If you do enough that is doable, you will get to the important, and your motivation will be fueled by your success. And quite simply, simplification signals a change, a realignment of our hopes and our everyday lives.
I do. I really like that. I think there feels something quite challenging to the way things are done in the idea of getting to simple, in what it takes to sit with that, and what actually matters versus what we're told matters. Yeah. And that feels like quite a bold act in many ways. The act of the boldness of not doing something you should do. Yeah, feels quite powerful and quite yeah. There's something in there. So yeah, no, that's great. How does it relate for you to this idea of pushing buttons?
Well, for me, when life gets simpler, many buttons disappear or can get resolved really easily. So one of the things within this is when you have a more simplified life with clearer rhythms in it, clearer schedules in it, then it just becomes easier that you're not reacting to all of those little things that are around you. So it's a bit like if you're wearing too many clothes, and especially if you are, I can remember my son, most of all, if he didn't wear comfortable clothes, it was really, really tricky to speak to him about anything. And this is when I'm talking when he was maybe 2, 3, 4, but also into 5 and 6. So he chose right at the very beginning, I hate trousers. They are horrible. But he would wear leggings. They were comfortable against his skin. So when somebody is uncomfortable in their skin, every single place they go to, they have buttons. That's just that movement, that scratch of material, that kind of something too tight. These are all buttons as well, and they're physical buttons on us. But when it's like that, it kind of distracts the head, and it can kind of distract all of the feelings going on in the body and tightness. And then somebody says to them something really simple like, are you thirsty? And a child or even a person can come back with the answer, no. And it's not that they're reacting to that question. It's that's the only answer they can give because they're already irritated by something else. So if you are comfortable with a house which is filled with books, as you can see, wow, I have plenty, then this is wonderful. If books to you represent what you didn't have when you were young, or at school you got told you must read that book, you must read that book, and this one, and you were overwhelmed by it, then seeing a whole load of books is just one of those things where you go, I'm not comfortable in this place. It's a button. And how to become comfortable with these kind of things can take a while of unpicking and finding out where did that come from. And frequently it did come from the past. Yeah, and there's a beautiful quote from somebody that Kim John Payne knows, a musician called Jewel, who says, if it's hysterical, it's historical. And I just find, I listened to that and I went, oh yes, that just resonates just so deeply within me. Just things like that. So yeah, if you react suddenly to something really quickly, it's a button.
Yeah, I think I'd really like to get into, like, you know, if we're talking about pushing buttons, what do we actually mean? What's going on? What you know, because obviously it's a metaphor. There aren't really buttons.
No. It feels like that sometimes with young children. The sleeve feels like a button sometimes, or the trousers. But so I think one of the first stories I've got was from a friend, and I was there. We were there staying with her. It's in a place in Canada, and she'd made these changes so that her, let's see, how old was he? I think he was about 3 or 4. And there was a play date had been cancelled and something else had gone on. And he said to her, "Mummy, you're horrible. You're wrecking my life and you're fat." 2 buttons there. You're wrecking my life, kind of trying to get guilt in there. They had emigrated to Canada for a new life. And she knew that wasn't true. So it wasn't a button. She didn't react to it. Only 2 months before, she'd had a baby. Her size was not quite back to, I think she's normally a size 6, size 8. She's still slimmer than me 2 months after birth, and that's pretty awesome. Not many do that. It's just such a big change that happens. The one she reacted to was, "You're fat." I knew that wasn't true. I could see it wasn't true, but she went, "I am not fat." And I thought, where does that come from? It's part of the self-image, and self-image that comes from maybe childhood things, but it's surrounding us in all of this media. And that was the very first time that I realized that, oh, other people have buttons that I don't. And one that I picked up on myself last year was from one of our children, the youngest one, who was going through such a disconnected time. She couldn't see any of her friends. There were Zoom meetups, and she was really, really unhappy, and she wasn't coping well with it. And her button to me, flung out, was, "You are so dumb. You are so stupid." And to that, I went, I am not stupid. I've got a degree. I've got a master's degree. I could list so many qualifications that I had, and emotional ones I could list out there. That was a button on me. That you are stupid. And my husband beautifully later on said to me, "I didn't know you had a button there. She got a button of yours." I thought, she did. And it went straight through to my heart and to my feelings. And it was wounding. And in that moment of time, after she'd said it and after my first reaction, something that I do when I know that I'm getting like that, I stop.
Mm.
I pause. Because conversations will, if they keep going when feeling wounded, with a child, they will model that feeling. They will model what you're about to do next. And that's what other adults will do. That's what everybody does, is they're constantly watching, constantly modeling. And so I just thought, I am not that. But yeah, oh, it was hurtful. Okay, am I gonna, and there's a lovely little acronym of WAIT. Pause, wait, and then why am I talking? Wait. And it's just, and she'd stormed off by then. And I waited. And then the next thing I did was I just went and I kept her company. I don't know what had caused her button to react, to fly out at me. I can't remember, but I remember my reaction and I remember what I did afterwards. And I know that an hour later, she said, I was really annoyed earlier. I'm sorry. And all I did was said, thank you. That means so much to me. And I gave her a great big long hug. And then we talked about something else and I read a book. But it's those kind of things that are buttons, and other people have buttons. If I was to continue doing that, it slowly drives people mad, and as it would me. So that's an auditory button that people can have. But what is your reaction to that button? And some people can ignore it, but other people, they'd just be, can you stop that? But the first thing to think of is, why am I reacting like that? And I can ask somebody, oh, could you put that pen down? It's a little bit irritating in my ear. I'm finding it a bit kind of loud. And the other person may not have known about that and could just put it down nicely, as opposed to a reaction that might be really big to that button of going straight to shouting. Yeah,
and it's a really interesting example because it's actually very relevant to my own experience. I think it's that relationship between what someone's doing in order to get by and the effect on someone else.
Yeah.
Because for me, I kind of have to move in some ways when I'm talking or thinking about anything. I almost always have in fact, I have right now a fiddle toy in my hand, but it's a silent one because I'm on camera. But without that, there's something, I find it harder. So if you have a pen in your hand with a clicky end, I do that just because it is actually helpful for me. It helps me process, it helps me kind of calm, it helps me maintain calm attention. The difficulty is when it disturbs someone else's calm attention. And I think there's really, really interesting things in there around, when we're helping other people develop those tools in a way, like, how do you work with the things that you're sensitive to? Because we're all sensitive to kind of, there's could be quite a lot of difference in sensitivity, and it doesn't really get spoken about very much. Some of us are very, very sensitive to certain things in the environment, and some of us aren't. I'm very strongly auditory sensitive and not very visually sensitive. My partner is the opposite. So it's a really, really interesting one. But interestingly, also you can have difficulty in the area you're not sensitive, almost, because it's harder to work with, it's harder to resolve. So it is another really tangled thing. I think that how that plays out, and you mentioned modeling, and I think as for me, it's like how we're modeling and how we pass that on is an awful lot of the work. In all of the work, I think of coaching work as modeling as much, at least as much as anything else. It's actually being with someone and embodying something that is a different way. And perhaps a more helpful way. It's not just about telling people what they should do.
Oh, no, it certainly isn't. I mean, it's why there's There's so many other things that you can do to actually bring yourself into a conversation, bring yourself into the presence of somebody else. And I learned this a lot through working with horses. And if you do something quickly and suddenly with a horse, if they're a young horse, the answer is generally a startle, is this normal? And either run or stay. So my horses are, I have 2 Icelandic horses, and they are now, I think, about 22, 23 years old. I lose track, but I've had them since they were 18 months old. And so I've done all of their training, and I've known as well when to stick my hand up and say, help, I don't have enough knowledge. Can you help me do the next part of this training? And they are absolutely fantastic, especially one of them, for knowing where I am. And if I'm reacting to anything that's going on, he'll look at me and he'll go, and I'll then realize, I'm bringing something up here that he doesn't want. And it's really, really strange to get this kind of behavior mirrored back from an animal. But he also has the communication skills to let me know, I don't want that. And I've also done things like I've looked at him and thought, oh, I need to practice some equine Bowen. And he used to look at me, and as soon as I had that thought, he'd turn around and he'd walk off. He knew how to sort of communicate. And so from this, I learned how to go into the space of another person, go into the space of another creature without asking anything apart from, I'd like to join you. And by doing it silently as well, we communicate so much just through our body language, but we also communicate things so subtly that we're not aware of, and that we can go slightly kind of out of normal experience by saying we've got these, we do have electromagnetic fields all the way around us. It can be picked up. There's plenty of research via the HeartMath Institute, where we can pick these fields up via very sensitive monitors. And you can end up feeling where it's comfortable to be with another person. So there are some people that you can get really close to and you can feel comfortable with. They're not pushing any of your buttons. But some people, if they're slightly not quite knowing where they are, other people go, well, I need to be way back here. And that's one of those very, very subtle buttons that people have, is physical space. And children have a different perception of physical space, just like young horses do as well. They'll quite happily knock into you. You can see that. And then it's, what do we get pushed when a child knocks into us? So you'll see it in with people, less so at the moment because of not getting quite so close to other people. But other children will go into other people's spaces and then go back out again. As adults, when somebody gets too close into our space, how comfortable does that get? And how much? It's a button as well. Where is the comfort level? And where are we in relation to kind of where they are? And what can we feel? And so many children, so many other people will feel comfortable with another person who doesn't have many buttons.
And
it's hold themselves differently.
It's surprising how it is. We can be aware of it. I think it's, for me, as well as being, there may be sensory modalities that we haven't fully understood. There's also the well-known ones used in more subtle ways. I think we read people and how they talk and the sound of their voice and the way that they're holding themselves on much deeper levels than we're usually consciously aware of. And we combine all of it and join it all together to make this usually very, a good interpretation of how they are. One of my I have some experience with horses as well, and it's very interesting how you approach the horse, your energy, the way you do exactly the same thing, but just like with a different sense of the thing, and they'll behave very, very differently, from being very welcoming to being very much not welcoming. And I think it's that space of what the body is communicating and what the mouth is communicating, and the disconnection between the two very often feel like a button. Actually, the origin of a, it's like it's almost like, okay, we're going to feel this, we feel this way, and then we do that. We must do that when we feel this way, otherwise bad stuff happens. Don't care what it is, bad stuff happens, you know. And it can get, I think it's also really important to note that with when I say bad stuff, those connections come from a time and from a connection where that can feel like an existential threat. Like if we do not do this, we might die. And at some point in life that may or may not be true, but the question is it true now? You know, but we still have the pull, we still have the button, so we're connecting to an existential threat.
And that is so much so about so many childhood experiences that can be dealt with in a good way. I'm thinking of one experience that somebody told me about recently where they still have a problem passing by certain places because they were bullied there at school. And what did their parents do? Their parents said, oh, they probably won't do it for ages or long. Nothing got done. And so it's carried on through decades of their life, knowing that they aren't secure. And even though they're incredibly successful, there's that part of them that was damaged at that moment, because when help could have been offered, they were ignored. They weren't listened to. They weren't listened to by their teachers, and they weren't listened to by pretty much the most important people they had in their life, which was their parents. And you kind of go, wow. And so little stories like that have been really big learning points for me about how much trauma, how small it can be right at the very beginning, but it stays. And it just stays and goes until it is resolved or not. And I know of people that will be walking around, even on the streets outside now, that they will probably never solve that trauma. They'll never solve where that button was, because it was so early in their life that they might just brush it off and go, oh, it's all gone and dusted. It isn't. And buttons like that just linger around and can come out at really, really strange and awkward times sometimes for other people. And it's whether somebody actually takes that step forward to change to something new as well. And that's part of the coaching work that is just so beneficial to so many people. But it can take a while, because just like that field tape, as I described earlier, if those buttons are all in amongst that field tape, and you kind of take a look back, maybe from a different perspective, maybe from a balcony or something like that, and you can see a whole load of those surface buttons and you can start picking away. But there's other ones buried in there that, as you're slowly getting rid of those ones, other ones come up from other experiences that have been held down, because if they came up, there might be a threat to security. And what do you do at that point? So yeah, and having children, I have to admit, brings out all of those buttons beautifully. And whether to deal with them, you need to change. And sometimes that change is not the easiest thing to do. And finding out where to begin. So when you've got a pile of tape, how do you find the ends? I only did that twice with my own horses, and then I learned never, ever, ever leave the tape like that. But it's finding that end piece. And when you do in life as well, when you've actually solved one of these buttons and you're not reacting anymore to it, to actually celebrate that and celebrate the fact that you've found it, celebrate that you're dealing with it, with your that you're changing, and actually to be able to express the gratitude to that button because it's kept you safe. There was a reason why that button was there. And one of the things that it does come down to in so many is it's to do with security. And security for the child within as you were growing up, security for that person that encountered that, whatever it was later in life. Yeah, it's a really, really big thing. And it brings up a lot of emotional feeling. And many of us with various buttons, we've been taught that button doesn't exist, to lock it inside. Oh, that feeling doesn't exist. Oh, just deal with it. Sort of ignore it. And that feeling is there, and it needs time to be processed. And it also needs somebody there willing to listen and be part of it. So, and when that does happen, it's, the emotional release that can happen is just so healing on so many aspects.
I think it's, for me, that there's a lot of really rich stuff in there. The first one I want to share really is my own experiences, is how unhelpful blame is in resolving this stuff. It's blame is like finding a loose end and then just pulling. It just tightens the knot.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that it's because you've spoken about how actually this workspace takes space and time, resources, energy, attention. And we don't always have those things available to us. And if you don't have those things available to you, it's not a moral reflection on you not having the opportunity to do that work. I think that's one of the things. The flip side of that is you don't have to do it all alone, and you can get help. But even reaching out and finding help is something that's difficult for many people. So how do you get help with getting help? That's the I think that's so it's first of all worth, I think, saying it's not a reflection on you or your parents or your what you pass on in that sense, but there is an opportunity there if you have the space to take it, to divert that path, to take it differently.
And also, whenever parents react that way, they're actually doing the best they can with the resources that they had at that moment in time. So they couldn't do anything different to what they did then. So and some people actually would prefer not to change. And there's a horse, he's a horse trainer, and he's done a number of UK clinics years ago, called Mark Rashid. And he was mentored by a fantastic old man. He just keeps on referring to him as the old man in many of his books that he wrote. And he would take Mark Rashid with him as he was going places. And Mark would say to him, "But look at that horse, you can help that horse there." And this old man would say, "I haven't been asked. If I haven't been asked, they're not willing to change. They don't want it at this moment in time. They might see me working with another horse and get a different response. And if they're curious and if they're ready to change, they'll ask." And in the meantime, that person isn't bad for doing what they're doing with that horse, with that child, with that person. They're doing the best they can with the resources they can. And when they're ready to change, something will happen, and they will. And some people will never find that path. And if that is the case, then there is no blame, there is no judgment. It's just the way that it is. No matter what we feel about that, when that person is ready, if everything is open so that they can see that it's not shut away from them, when they're ready, they'll find that path.
I think
the ability to say, well, for somebody, if you ask, "Can I help you?" and they say, "Oh, no, thanks." The ability to say, "Fine, that's okay." It's not a reflection of anyone else's ability. Again, that can be a button. Somebody saying, "Oh, I don't want your help." Well, why not? That reaction. Yeah, and I now know if somebody refuses help, the answer is, that's fine.
Yeah, it's a really big one, and I think for me, it can be very. particularly when we have some power and authority,
Mm.
using that to insist that other people change in specific ways is frequently rather unhelpful. I'm not sure it's ever helpful. And instead it's about using, making an invitation as transparent as we can to whatever it is that we're exploring. And I think relatedly, like anything that really bothers us on that level has to be a resonance. It has to be something that's in us too. And if it really bothers you, then the first place to start is in you, not in someone else.
Yes. Yeah.
And if they don't find that their most pressing problem, or they don't find it something they're sensitive to at all, then that's not theirs to deal with.
Yeah.
That's, it becomes like, well, if I can make you behave differently, if I can make it, then I don't have to feel this way.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is an origin of many buttons in many ways, and internally as well. And I'm not just talking about actually in interpersonal relationships, but actually in our internal relationship with ourselves. It's like, well, I can make myself do this.
Yeah. That would be the head speaking. If I think about something, I think I'll do it this way. I mean to do it this way. And there's a hesitation. It could be that the kind of processing from the heart is going, I feel this isn't the right time. Or, within the gut of, I just want to leave that one. I don't quite go there. And we've got these kind of almost different internal brain systems within our body. And they actually help us out if we allow ourselves to listen to them. And our head brain is the first one that's really, it's on the ball, it's there, it's got all of that cognitive power, and creativity, which is absolutely awesome. It's amazing. And if it's not coherent with what we're feeling in our heart, it's the center of our compassion, then we're not actually being entirely kind of aligned within ourselves. And just bringing and then being able to bring in the gut for our courage as well. So, I mean, a lot of health conditions as well can be because we're fighting parts within ourselves. And which part is where and where we're feeling it. And I mean, we can even get into explorations of, well, there's a part of me like this, and we can even explore a part, give it a color, give it a movement. And what happens when we change the color, change the movement, as long as it's the right thing, and then see what it's like and see where we perceive kind of our time, whether we're looking forwards into the future or not, or if we're actually always dwelling in the past. So for me, as you can tell, past is behind me, future is in front. But then there are other cultures where the future is actually behind because they can't see it yet. You've not been in it. And I mean, finding that out was kind of almost mind-blowing because, and other people see future up and past down. You kind of go, well, if that's in everybody, in people that I speak with, they have those different perceptions. How many other different perceptions are there that people have to work with, or not so much have to work with, but just are aware of? So many people work well in different ways. And to be open to listening to it and not saying, oh, that's just your way of doing it, or I only do it my way, or the measuring of things. So I can kind of almost bring in the topic of how schooling happens with our children. How many buttons get installed through schooling? You must conform. Why? Because it's what we do. Why? And why do we have to act this way? Why do we have to be this way? Why do we have to learn this? And the modeling of the teacher and of the system around them of, well, this is our culture, but this is the school culture, but that school has a different culture, and this is our country's culture, this is our continent's culture. It's so many different things can be brought in, and to be open to all of these different ways, knowing which is the way that works best not only for me, but for those around us. And children are only aware of themselves, first of all, and then their family. And then when they get older, so yeah, in this kind of 0 to 7 kind of age group, you're just looking at themselves and their family unit.
Mm.
And they will be aware of other people around, but children don't tend to play with other children easily or well until later, and they learn the concept of sharing.
Mm.
And even some adults, do they share things well? Not necessarily. And going into kind of sort of tweens and teens, there's more emotional things that are developing and much more into the feelings in the body and the confusion that can be in there. Again, that's when we need to give the time and the space and the listening and no judging. So in schools, I know that a number of schools do kind of circle time and sharing circles. And I discovered it not from one school, but from a number of schools. And I think, who taught this? Because they share their feelings. And one of my children shared that they were tired. And then the member of staff that was there said, well, you should get to bed earlier. You should have more sleep. And that's a judgment. And who could that be blamed upon? The child almost felt blamed for not getting to bed. So therefore brought that to me saying, you should have got me to bed earlier. And I said, well, yeah, I gave you the option. You were very busy reading and you were enjoying it. And so within that circle, they were not actually held and listened to. They were also judged.
And I think
that's not helpful or useful. When somebody's offering up a feeling, it's the listening and the, so you're tired at the moment. Is there anything that you need to do right now to help that?
And it really does play into the conformity thing for me, because it's one of the, you know, one of the interesting things, having worked in looked at education, particularly education technology, for a lot of my career, this whole thing about engagement and like, how can we make people engage? It's problematic. You know, it's like, well, like if someone feels, so if something's really interesting and exciting, I don't feel tired. Even if I don't actually have that much energy, you can power through an awful lot if something's really interesting and exciting. So on one side, it's like, okay, it might be helpful to get more sleep. On the other side, it might be helpful to make school more interesting. I think, and it's like, well, who is moving here, and what's the, you know, what is it? Just one person who has to adapt entirely to another, or is there some intersection you can reach? Is there something on both sides? You know, do you know everything? Are you sure this is the right model? Are you really sure? You know, because, and it can you, you know, and being able to be transparent about like why you think that's true, you know, where that comes from, is a really, really, really empowering thing for everyone. And it builds, you know, people talk about building trust, and I don't think trust is one of those slightly debased words. For me, there's a certain sort of trust that comes with like consistency, and another sort of trust which gets neglected, which is about actually what happens when inconsistency arises.
I think I would call it, potentially call it rapport. When you gain rapport from somebody and you're kind of operating on the same wavelength. And it might be new stuff, but it could also be the same stuff from different directions. What you're doing with that rapport is testing out where is it? Are we meeting there? Are we meeting there? Or do we want that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and that is, it feels much more relational rapport than you know, trust. It feels like a one-way thing. Weirdly, it shouldn't be, but it absolutely feels like, you know, you make other people trust you. It's a strange idea that it's not mutual, and I think that mutuality is a really important part of all of this for me. You know, is like, and it's true working with animals, and I don't have experience of having my own children. I have done some work with children and actually work with animals, And it's that sense of like, okay, I'm going to be transparent about what I know, or what I believe, why I believe it, and where that ends.
Yeah.
You know, where what are the limits here?
The ability to say, I don't know.
And working with a bunch of children who, in a context where no adult had ever really shared that with them before, I don't think, had ever said, okay, this is what I would like to happen. This is why I think that will happen. But it might go wrong. And sometimes it does. And then being like, sorry, I was wrong.
Yeah.
We can do something else, or but no, you know, actually being with that, I watched a bunch of kids suddenly realize they could actually do that themselves. Mm-hmm. You know, they could make mistakes, they could be wrong about things, and that was okay.
Yeah,
and
it's being okay with the mistakes, and then learning from them, and going, well, the mistake helped me make it change for the better. Or actually, you can make mistake after mistake after mistake, and just know, well, don't follow that path or that path or that path. And then the ability to be open, and for somebody else to just help. This is where to go. It's openness, rapport, and non-judgmentalness is just such an important thing to offer to everybody that interacts with us.
It makes me really think, you know, if we talked about this idea of something that bothers you on some level being your problem, but what you make me think is actually, well, the fact it's something you're experiencing doesn't mean to say that you can't ask for help with it. And actually, one of the most immediate people you can ask for help with it is the person who's causing that resonance for you, you know, who's raising that for you. And that form of help does not necessarily mean asking them to change. It's like, well, you know, you can explore that with them. Like, what's between this? Why is this a thing? Rather than being straight from the button to the reaction, you know, from the input to the output without anything in between. And I think that idea, certainly that idea that where we feel responsible to someone, and I think responsible for and responsible to is something really important here as well. Is being responsible to is very different to being responsible for. And I think the more we can let go of feeling responsible for someone else or some other being, the easier time both parties have.
Definitely, the ability to let go is really good. And just thinking about the different worlds that people have when they connect. There is one strategy which is, it's really good especially after the wait and the pause, is the kind of connecting in, and how do people do it? And actually, has anyone been taught how to connect with another person? We don't tend to do that apart from learning it when we're a child. But it's possible for people later in life to learn how to connect with other people just by watching other people do it successfully. So it's that modeling of behavior. And there's a beautiful kind of little way of remembering it of if for instance, with young children, and you want them out the house, it's school time or you're going somewhere, and they're busy in their world. Their world is playing with Lego. Their world is playing with in the mud, in the sand, in the plants somewhere. They're busy. Their brain, body, everything is engaged in that. And the way to connect with them is to enter their world. And if you're entering their world, you do what they're doing, or you're not staring at them. You're just being there within that kind of their energy field. Think of it as that way, just close to them. And they will pick up on, they might flicker a glance just sideways, or they might tell you without even looking at you, I'm doing this, I'm creating a mud house. Really? And you're just accepting that. And then once you know that they know that you're here, that you tell them your own world. We need to go out soon. We're going to be going to do that. We're going to be doing that and that and that. And they might acknowledge that, they might not. It will go in. And then so there's their world, there's your world. And then you go, our world. And that's when you introduce, when you finished creating that mud house, finishing that Lego bit, oh, does that need to be put aside for later? We can come back to that later, because next we need you with your shoes on. And your socks are there. In fact, which socks are you having? It's going to be these socks. And then you slowly pace the way out. So you're letting them know you've gone from their world. And they've just been, that's why so many children react when you go, right, it's time to go.
There's no time to swap. And as someone who's,
if somebody says, right, we're going now. What?
I'm particularly sensitive to context, as clinically sensitive to context. And that is like that swap. If it happens faster than I can kind of do internally, it's actually painful on some level. It's psychic pain.
It goes in there, or it goes into
and that's not anything that's actually beyond, that's not trauma related. That's actually situational. That's just how I happen to experience the world, and it has advantages too. But one of the disadvantages is the swap, and the swap back is hard as well. And so I think that, but being willing, if you're willing to, you're going to interrupt someone in that sense, whatever level you think, whatever they're doing. If you're willing to do that without being willing to enter their world, then there's something very unbalanced going on there. So I really love that advice around the joining someone in their space, rather before you try and get them into the space that you would like them to be, and you would like you to be. I think that's a really, really powerful, really lovely way to sum up the conversation, really, and a place to start thinking. So I always do like to turn this into something so slightly practical. Is if someone's thinking about playing with this, starting out with this, listen to what we've said and would like to kind of give this a try, where could they start? Where would be an interesting, potentially a place to start playing with this and trying this out?
Notice yourself in every interaction that you're doing. Also, it can go down into, what do you do left-handed and right-handed? And it's these small noticings that help you create the pause. So if you always go up the stairs with your left foot first, pause and do it with your right foot. And if anyone has ever tried brushing their teeth with their left hand instead of their right hand, notice the uncomfortableness and notice what it takes to change, because that's a habit. Changing habits, there's that pause first. So do something in a different way. If you open your car door with the right hand, pause before you do it with the left hand. See what it feels like. It's that pause. We need more pauses in our life, even if it's only 1 second at a time. But those 1 seconds add up to minutes and hours, and they just help us align ourselves truly and just deeply. So,
and I think I really like that piece of advice, but I would like to add that it's a practice, and it's hard. But we're not taught to pause very often, and it can be a real struggle. So I think it's worth noting again, self-compassion with what happens when that when that happens. But no, that's brilliant. So if someone wants to kind of find a bit more about you, what you do, or get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, there's my website, which is chloealdam.com. Also, I'm on Facebook and Instagram with the handle @simplicitybowen. Cool. And my email address is simplicitybowen@gmail.com. So I'm at all of those places, and I'm starting to plan a parenting course involving all of these kind of things, as well as coaching to help you be the best you possibly can be. And that's including successes and failures. We've got to celebrate them all. And that, I hope, will be starting in September, in the autumn. So yeah, and that's really exciting. So that's just kind of taking lots of parenting knowledge and information, how to simplify your life, your connections, how to be compassionate to yourself as well, and just how to do those really small, doable changes, even if it's 1 second at a time.
No, that's great. Thank you. Really, really interesting conversation today. And yeah, I think actually quite a lot of kind of information and practical advice. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really hope that got you in the audience thinking as well. It's, you know, often we kind of it's about sparking new thoughts rather than necessarily coming up with definite answers. And if it did get you thinking and you want to talk to anyone about it, please do. But do reach out to me or to Chloe as well, because we'd love to continue the conversation. And continuing the Delightful Dissent conversation, the next episode is going to be about the idea, do something about it. I'm going to be talking to Kevin Davidson, who specializes in coaching men unable to have children. And I think this is there's often really interesting links in the work that we do. But it's a really interesting assumption and a really interesting space, particularly that drive to fix things and solve things, and like feels so related. And how we measure our own self-worth against our ability to do that. And to actually act on the world in that way. I think that's a really, really interesting space. So please do join us for that one, and that will be at 1 p.m. UK time on Tuesday, the 6th of July. So slightly different times. These will move around a little bit. So but please do join us then. In the meantime, please do go out there and make some delightful dissent of your own. Thank you very much. Goodbye.